The quiet moment that changed everything. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon in Los Angeles, when Sandra Bullock sat on the cold steps of her porch, her head buried in her hands. Her golden retriever, Charlie, had just passed away that morning after years of being her silent companion. Through every heartbreak, every movie set, every lonely night, the house felt too quiet now, too heavy, like the air had forgotten how to breathe. Her phone kept buzzing, messages, calls, condolences from friends, co-stars, and fans, but she didn't have the strength to answer. Every sound felt too loud, every word too shallow. She just wanted silence. She wanted her dog back, and that's when she heard soft footsteps behind her. She turned around, half expecting it to be her assistant, but instead, standing there with a soaked hoodie and that familiar calm expression, was Keanu Reeves. He didn't say a word at first. He just walked up the stairs and sat beside her. Raindrops clung to his hair, dripping down his face, but he didn't care. For a long time, they didn't speak. Keanu just sat there, elbows on his knees, looking out at the gray sky. Sometimes silence can be more healing than any words. And that was exactly what Sandra needed. Not advice, not comfort, just presence. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't even get to say goodbye properly." One minute he was wagging his tail, and the next, her voice broke. Keanu didn't interrupt. He just let her cry. After a while, he spoke quietly. "I know what it's like. When I lost my dog, Sam, I felt like the world lost color. He was all I had for years." Sandra lifted her eyes, surprised. She remembered reading about it once, that the dog from one of his movies had been his real companion. It wasn't a story for cameras. It was real grief, the kind that leaves permanent marks. "How did you get through it?" she asked. Keanu smiled faintly. "I didn't, not really, but I learned to carry it. Love doesn't disappear when they do, it just changes form." A soft wind blew between them, scattering wet leaves across the porch. The rain had started to ease, but the world still looked washed out. Yet something in that moment shifted. The sadness didn't vanish, but it felt shared, lighter, almost bearable. Sandra leaned her head on Keanu's shoulder. It wasn't romantic. It was human. Two souls quietly understanding each other's pain without needing to explain it. After a long silence, Keanu said, "You know, maybe Charlie's still around. Maybe he's just in a place where he can run without getting tired." A tear slid down Sandra's cheek, but this time it came with a small smile. "You always say things that sound simple, but feel like truth." Keanu shrugged softly. "Maybe truth doesn't need big words." And so, they sat there until the sky began to clear, to friends, bound not by fame or films, but by lost love, and the quiet kind of strength that only pain can teach. When the first sunlight broke through the clouds, Sandra finally whispered, "Thank you for coming." Keanu turned his head slightly, his eyes gentle. "You don't have to thank me. Sometimes we just show up. That's enough." As the camera would fade out, the audience would see them still sitting side by side, the world calm again, the silence between them no longer empty, but full. A letter from the past. Next morning, sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, touching the framed photos of Charlie that Sandra had placed all around her living room. The house still felt strange without the sound of paws on the wooden floor. She made coffee but couldn't drink it. Every sip tasted like memories. As she sat on the couch holding Charlie's old leash, there was a gentle knock on the door. She opened it to see Keanu again, standing there with 2 cups of coffee and a small brown envelope. "You left early yesterday," he said quietly, "so I thought maybe you shouldn't be alone today." Sandra smiled weakly and stepped aside to let him in. "I don't even know how to say thank you." "You don't have to," Keanu replied. He set the coffee down and handed her the envelope. "I found this last night while going through my old stuff. I wrote it years ago after Sam died. It helped me heal. Maybe it'll help you too." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, handwritten, old, a little worn. She unfolded it slowly and began to read aloud. "Dear Sam, I thought losing you would end something. But it didn't. It began something else. Every quiet morning reminds me that love doesn't need a heartbeat to exist. You taught me patience, forgiveness, and loyalty without ever speaking a word. Maybe the world doesn't get it, but you were family. And even though I walk alone now, I know I'm never really alone." By the time she finished reading, her eyes were full again, but it wasn't the same kind of crying as before. This time it felt cleansing, like water washing away dust. "You wrote that?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Keanu nodded. "I never showed it to anyone before, not even to the press. It's too personal. But something about yesterday reminded me that maybe words, even the quiet ones, can reach someone when nothing else can." Sandra looked at him with a kind of gratitude that words couldn't express. "You know, people always see you as the strong, silent one. But this is what strength really looks like." Keanu smiled faintly. "Strength isn't silence. It's what you choose to hold on to when everything else falls apart." They spent the next few hours walking through her garden, remembering the funny things Charlie used to do, how he'd chase butterflies, how he'd fall asleep halfway through fetch. They laughed through their tears, finding comfort in shared stories of loss and love. But just when the world began to feel lighter again, Sandra's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was an unknown number, but the message said something that made her heart race. "You don't know me, but your dog's story saved my life." Her hands shook as she showed it to Keanu. He read it once, then looked at her. "Do you know who that is?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, but whoever it is, they sound broken." Keanu placed his coffee down, his eyes thoughtful. "Maybe that's our sign. Maybe someone out there needs what you just found today." She looked at the message again, a mix of confusion and curiosity filling her chest. "What do you mean?" Keanu's voice was calm, but there was something powerful behind it. "Maybe this isn't the end of Charlie's story. Maybe it's the beginning of someone else's healing." The camera would slowly fade on Sandra's face as she whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe you're right." The stranger who needed hopethi next evening. Sandra sat on her couch, staring at the message again. She couldn't stop thinking about it. "You don't know me, but your dog's story saved my life." It sounded desperate, yet sincere. She hesitated for hours, unsure if replying was the right thing to do. Finally, she typed back double quotes, "Hi, I don't know who you are, but I'm glad Charlie's story helped you. Can I ask how?" Minutes turned into an hour. Keanu was still there, quietly fixing tea in her kitchen. When her phone buzzed again, both of them looked at the screen. The reply said, "I was planning to end everything tonight. Then I saw the photo you posted of your dog. I don't know why, but something in his eyes told me to hold on. Maybe love isn't just for humans." Sandra's throat tightened. She showed the message to Keanu without saying a word. His eyes softened, and for a moment, he just nodded slowly. "Let's call them," he said. "Sometimes people don't need advice. They just need to be heard." Sandra hesitated. "But what if they don't answer? Or what if it's too much?" Keanu looked at her gently. "Then at least they'll know someone tried." After a deep breath, she sent another message. "Would you like to talk? No pressure. I just want you to know you're not alone." A few minutes later, her phone rang. An unknown number. She answered quietly, "Hello?" A trembling voice came through the line, young, broken, full of pain. "Is this really Sandra Bullock?" Sandra looked at Keanu, who gave a reassuring nod. "Yes, it's me," she said softly. "What's your name?" "Lily," the girl said. "I'm 21. I lost my mom last year. My dog, Max, died last month. I thought no one would understand what that kind of loneliness feels like. But when I saw your post about Charlie, I realized maybe I'm not the only one trying to survive it." Sandra felt tears rising again, but she kept her voice calm. "You're not alone, Lily. Grief feels endless, but it changes. One day, you wake up and you find a small reason to smile again, even if it's tiny." Keanu leaned closer and whispered, "Tell her about the letter." So Sandra shared Keanu's story, the letter he wrote to his dog Sam years ago. How grief becomes softer when shared. Lily listened silently, and for a moment, the line went quiet. Then Lily said something neither of them expected. "I wish I could meet you both someday. Not because you're famous, but because you care." Sandra smiled through her tears. "You already met us, Lily. Right here." After hanging up, the silence in the room felt different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Keanu looked out the window. "You see, Charlie's love just reached someone you've never met. That's what love does. It travels. Sandra nodded slowly. It's strange, isn't it? Sometimes the people who need healing find each other by accident. Keanu smiled faintly. Maybe it's not an accident. Maybe it's how the universe works, quietly, kindly, as they watched the city lights outside. Both of them knew something had shifted. What began as loss was slowly turning into purpose. The night of the letter that night. The air felt strange, quiet but full of something unspoken. Sandra couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Lily, the young girl who had called, and about how one simple post about her dog had changed the course of someone's life. She walked out to the balcony, wrapped in a soft blanket, and looked out at the dark city. Down below, lights shimmered like tiny stars trapped on Earth. Behind her, Keanu was still awake too. He had been sitting on the couch, reading an old notebook filled with poems and memories. "You're still up?" he asked, his voice low and calm. "Yeah," she said softly. "I can't stop thinking about that girl. How many people are out there feeling that kind of loneliness and never reach out?" Keanu closed his notebook and joined her on the balcony. "More than we think. People carry pain like shadows, invisible but always there." She turned to him, eyes thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder why we meet certain people at the right time? Like Lily messaging me just when I thought I couldn't handle the silence anymore." Keanu nodded slowly. "I think pain connects us in ways comfort never can. Sometimes the universe uses broken things to help fix each other." For a moment, they stood there in silence, listening to the wind. Then Sandra said, "I want to do something. Not just for Lily, for anyone who's ever lost someone they love. Maybe we can start something. A place for stories, like yours, like mine, like Charlie's." Keanu looked at her, his eyes warm. "A place where people can talk about what they've lost and what they've learned from it." "Yes," she whispered. "Maybe we can call it Letters to Love." Keanu smiled faintly. "That sounds beautiful. And maybe the first letter should be from you." She thought for a long time. Then she went inside, took a blank page from her notebook, and began to write. Keanu watched quietly as her pen moved across the paper. "Dear Charlie, you were more than a pet. You were a heartbeat beside mine. I miss your quiet presence, the way you'd rest your head on my lap when words failed me. But today, I learned that even in death, you gave someone else a reason to live. Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't vanish, it multiplies." Her hand trembled slightly as she finished. She looked at Keanu. "Do you think this could really help people?" He nodded. "It already has. You just don't see how far your kindness travels." Sandra smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Maybe it's time I stop hiding my pain. Maybe healing begins when we share it." Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder. "And maybe healing never ends, it just changes shape." The next morning, Sandra posted her letter online under the title Letters to Love. Within hours, thousands of messages began pouring in, people from all over the world sharing their own stories of loss, hope, and unexpected healing. Keanu watched the screen light up with tears in his eyes. "You did it," he whispered. "No," Sandra said softly, watching the messages scroll endlessly. "We did." When silence turned into healing me the next morning, Sandra's phone was overflowing with messages. Thousands of people from around the world had written to her, stories of pets, parents, friends, and even strangers they'd lost. Some messages were long and full of tears, others short, but filled with raw emotion. Each one carried a heartbeat, a story waiting to be heard. Keanu walked into the room, carrying breakfast. "You haven't slept," he said gently. "I couldn't," she replied. "Look at this, Keanu. All these people. They're writing as if they've been waiting for someone to finally listen." He placed the tray down and looked at the screen. There were messages from India, Brazil, Germany, and places she had never heard of. People were writing not just to Sandra, but to Charlie. Some said they felt his spirit. Others said they dreamed about their own pets after reading her post. "See?" Keanu said softly. "Love travels faster than light. You created something real." Sandra smiled weakly. "It doesn't feel like mine anymore. It feels like it belongs to everyone who's ever lost someone." Keanu nodded. "That's what makes it beautiful." Just then, another message appeared. This one different from the rest. It said, "I'm Lily. You probably don't remember me, but your call changed everything. I went to the animal shelter today. I found a small puppy that reminded me of Max, I think. I'm ready to love again." Sandra covered her mouth as tears welled up. Keanu smiled, his eyes soft. "There it is," he said. "That's the reason the pain existed, to create this moment." But the story didn't end there. A few hours later, a major news network reached out. They wanted to feature Letters to Love as a global healing project. Sandra hesitated at first, afraid of turning something pure into a headline. But Keanu convinced her. "This isn't about fame," he said. "It's about giving people a place to breathe, to know they're not alone." So they agreed. A week later, Sandra and Keanu sat together in a small studio, surrounded by handwritten letters pinned on the walls. The interviewer asked what inspired them to start it. Sandra looked at the camera and said quietly, "It began with silence, mine and his, and the silence of a world that forgets how to listen." Keanu added, "Sometimes you don't need to fix pain. You just need to sit beside it." The interviewer paused, visibly moved. "And what do you hope this project becomes?" Sandra smiled softly. "A reminder that love doesn't die. It just changes homes." After the interview aired, the response was overwhelming. Donations poured in to help shelters, grief centers, and therapy programs. Artists volunteered to design spaces where people could write letters and hang them for others to read. And in every letter, whether written by a child or an old man, there was one thing in common: the belief that love, no matter how broken or lost, always finds a way back. That night, as Sandra scrolled through messages, Keanu looked at her and said, "You know, Charlie would be proud." She smiled. "I think he's already wagging his tail somewhere." The moonlight filled the room, soft and peaceful. And for the first time since losing Charlie, Sandra didn't feel alone. The day the world stood still passed since the first letter. And Letters to Love had grown far beyond what Sandra and Keanu imagined. It wasn't just a social page anymore. It had become a global movement. Schools, shelters, hospitals, and community centers joined in. People started organizing letter nights, where strangers came together to write to those they had lost. Candles, quiet music, and honest words filled the rooms with something the world had forgotten: peace. Sandra often visited those gatherings quietly, never announcing who she was. She would sit among people, listening to them share, cry, and laugh through their pain. Each story felt like another piece of Charlie's love finding its way into the world. Keanu stayed beside her through it all. Sometimes he spoke on stage about the beauty of stillness. Other times, he simply watched from the back, hands in his pockets, his quiet presence enough to calm a crowd. One evening, after a long day of visiting an animal rescue center, Sandra and Keanu sat on a bench overlooking the ocean. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and gold. Seagulls drifted in slow circles above the water. "It's strange," Sandra said quietly. "For years, I thought I'd spend my whole life running from pain. But now I see. Maybe pain was never the enemy. Maybe it was the doorway." Keanu looked at her, the fading light reflecting in his eyes. "Pain shows us where love used to live," he said. "But it also shows us where love still can." She smiled faintly. "You always make things sound simple." He shrugged. "Maybe life is simpler than we make it. Maybe we just forget to listen." They sat in silence for a while, watching the waves. Then Sandra pulled out a small folded letter from her pocket. "This came today," she said softly. It was from Lily. "Dear Sandra and Keanu, I wanted you to know that the puppy I adopted, I named her Hope. Every night, I read her stories from Letters to Love. I'm starting to heal. Thank you for helping me remember that love never leaves. It just changes shape." Sandra folded the letter gently, her eyes glistening. "She named her dog Hope," she whispered. Keanu smiled. "Then Charlie's story really did find its ending." "No," she said softly. "It found its beginning, as the last bit of sunlight disappeared." Sandra placed a small photo of Charlie on the bench. The sea breeze lifted her hair, carrying the photo's corner gently against her hand. Keanu reached over, holding it still with his fingers. They didn't say anything more. They didn't need to. The world had gone quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of every soul who had ever loved and lost, breathing together in the space between words. When they stood to leave, Sandra looked back at the ocean one last time and whispered, "Thank you, Charlie, for everything." Keanu slipped his hands into his pockets, smiled softly, and said, "Come on, we've got more letters to read." And as they walked away, the waves behind them rolled gently against the shore like a heartbeat, steady, eternal, alive.